Welcome to day 13, volume 13 of ZenMadman's Nutty Pot Limit Omaha journey thing. I've got 9875, which is a one gapper rundown with the gap at the bottom, so it's got the better structure. It's also suited to the 9, so I believe I will defend this against an open raise from either the button, which this player is, or the cutoff. They make it $3, so they make it a little cheaper, a little easier to say, yeah, let's see a flop. It's a pretty decent flop. I've got bottom 2 pair and the undergutter, so not a great flop, but decent. Now that's a fairly poor turn card insofar as if they had a king, my 2 pair is no good. If they had 10s, my 2 pair is no good, right? I have kings and 9s now with really no kicker. I mean, the kicker 8 actually plays in a way it doesn't in Hold'em. I still have the undergutter. I have a flush draw now, but I think this hand went from pretty good on the flop to just like get in a lot of trouble on the turn. Heads up, maybe I'm supposed to continue with something like that. I'm not certain, but it doesn't feel good. It feels like there's just going to be a lot of runouts that are going to be hard for me to proceed. That said, an 8 or a 9 would give me a boat, whereas a king isn't a boat unless it has an 8 or a 9 as well. A spade would give me a flush, and that 6 would have given me a straight. So maybe I can call that bet. If they bet like half pot, I think I'm definitely peeling there. Okay. So yeah, we've got a 6-handed game now. Not too much of a read, I think, from this one player. I guess I'll say RFI 3X from button, just so we remember that's that player that we played that hand against. And as the session goes on, if that player leaves, then we'll know that there's a new player because we had a note on them and we wouldn't anymore. All right, we have another 3X raise. Sort of a raise first in. I mean, it is literally, but they'd also posted, so they were exercising their option to raise. And that's something I can note. Why not? Let's talk about habits today. In cutoff, under the gun, and 3X, something like that. Okay, so habits. I've been trying to build habits for the last 13 days, I guess, today included, and it's been going well. I don't think you really build a habit in 13 days. You begin to develop a habit in 13 days. Some people say 21 days, some people say 66. I think it's like many things where there isn't really going to be a hard cutoff on what is or isn't a habit. It's how much of a habit, how strong of a habit is it? If you miss a day, do you snap back? Does it feel weird to miss a day? Is it hard to miss a day because it's so habitual? And those would be daily habits, right? There's other kinds of habits like having good posture. Although, is that a habit? I don't know. I'd say a habit is every time you notice your posture and think about it, you go, oh, okay, you make an adjustment. Maybe you roll your shoulders sort of up and down the back. And I find a lot of times when I start to develop one habit, a lot of other things kind of fall into place. Whereas a lot of the time I'll try to force myself to do a whole bunch of things a particular way, and that does not work nearly as well. Because then if one of them goes, then the others go. So I think trying to find like a key habit that can inspire other habits, help you begin to build other habits, rather than trying to force all of those at once, might be more effective. But as with everything, I pretty much say, try a bunch of things, see what works for you. Pay attention and try to be critical in terms of not like having a preconceived notion about what's going to work, because when you do, Then we've got confirmation bias at play, right? If we think a thing's going to be a particular way, then we look for the data that supports that, and then we say, oh, look, there's data that supports it. Yeah, okay, but if there's a lot of data that contradicts it, maybe we shouldn't come to that conclusion, or we shouldn't hold that viewpoint with such firm conviction. So we have a raise and a 3-bet. Looks like a full pot size 3-bet to me, right? In terms of calculating the pot, the 3-bet would be 3 times the raise size, right? So the bet's $3, so you go 3 times this plus the trail, which is the $1 and the $1.50. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus $1.50 is $10.50. And the 50 cents, it's funny, it just like disappeared, but it's still in the pot somewhere. Very peculiar choice by the site to have the player's bet disappear when the player disappears. The money's still in the pot, so I would say an oversight or a glitch. Really, it shouldn't disappear. It's still in the pot, but unless you want to think that those 50 cents are 50 of the cents that got raked. So rake is substantial. All right, this board, the pre-flop 4-better, right? There was a 4-bet pre-flop. They should have, a bunch of ace-ace. They should still have a bunch of ace-ace. When they check the flop, they probably won't have much ace-ace because it's a little fragile on a straightening flushing board. Whereas, and we know that they didn't flop top set with a nut flush draw because here comes the ace of spades. There's a significant bet from the original pre-flop raiser, who I believe 3-bet pre. So the in-position player, maybe they were slow playing. Maybe they had a hand like ace-7, ace-8, pocket sevens. Maybe they have a flush. It's hard to say. If they had quads, I don't see why they would raise here. So I don't think anybody had ace-ace. This hand, actually, I think I am undervaluing. I think I'm undervaluing this hand. So we will mark this for review after the session. I looked this one up yesterday, and I was like, oh, that's better than I thought it was. I think it's easy to overrate it, right? Because you're like, oh, those king cards are kind of all in the same vicinity. There's 2 gaps, yeah, but like, I've got the 3rd of the suit. That's a negative, but I am suited to the king, right? Being suited to the king is pretty nice, and 3 of the cards are Broadway cards, which is always very nice. And then, unless they're all 3 10s or something, that's not very nice. And then the 8 connects to the 10 and the jack. This board isn't one we'd be having too much of. What hands are betting out here? Could be a straight, if they're betting a straight, I would hope it's the 6-9 instead of just a naked 6. I think you want a little bit more than just a 1-card straight. Basically, yes, they do technically need a second card in their hand, but it's going to be hard to get called by basically, if you're value betting, I think you're trying to get that straight to call you. Although since the turn went check, check, not so sure. Oh, no, that makes sense, actually. All right, so this is not worth calling a raise. It would have been a decent hand to catch a free flop with, though. We got a pair and a couple of suited Broadway cards. Again, we've got that 3rd card of the suit, which is bad. Sometimes people say it's very bad. I don't know. I feel like that's probably an overstatement, but I haven't looked at all the sims and the equities and whatnot. I'm rather curious to see how those things differ. But also, when we do make the flush, having that extra card might actually be good if we make a non-nut flush, because it's less likely we run into the nuts. Half pot bet from the button, who were they? Yeah, they were the pre-flop raiser. So I think they should have, I don't know how much like ace-ace type hands they should be betting on the 9-9-5. They're pretty short though, so it might be reasonable. If they have a 9, I would expect them to just jam it here with really any 9. Straight draws did not get there. If they have ace-ace, they also might just jam. Although, what was the player out of position calling with, right? Did they have a 9 and they didn't get there? Or did they have a straight draw? And then they're like, I don't know. It's a little odd. So this player on the right we'll keep an eye on. I think there's a reasonable chance that they are a player that we are happy to have at the table. They're probably going to, if they cold call this, then I feel like there's a reasonable chance that they're one of these 100 VPIP players. So We'll see whether we can see a showdown, right? We're gonna try and pay attention to some showdowns today, and see whether we can, sometimes not just the percentage of hands that people play, but we see the actual hands that they turn over in spots. That gives us an indication of sort of how big their range is, even when we've only seen, one or two hands. All right, so the pre-flop raiser is thinking here. I wouldn't expect to see a ton of action on this board because I folded 2 of the 4s, right? So there's a lot less of a chance that someone has ace-4 or 6-4. This player's kind of saying that they do. A player with like a couple of 6s could bluff this card. If you have like 6-6, 8-9, or 6-6 and clubs, that would be a really nice bluffing combination, because it's pretty easy for someone to have a 7 or an overpair or a ton of equity against your, meager 6s, but it's hard for someone to have the nuts. And when it's hard for someone to have the nuts, you can be like, hey, do you have the nuts? And they're like, no. And then you just take the pot. It's pretty much, I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what the bets are saying. They're saying, do you have the nuts? And then the fold is just, no, right? Okay. Yesterday, I was very tired when I streamed. There was a reason for it. The day before I had done my stream, I'd been on the Ethical Pandas stream. I had recorded 2 podcasts and done a coaching session and done other stuff as well. So, it wasn't like, oh, why am I so tired? It was like, no, of course I'm tired, right? So, but I think that's the kind of day when we really make habits into habits, is when we push through that, like, oh, this is hard for me today, right? Those are the days when they get closer to being habits. The days when we're full of energy and, cheerful and everything, those are a lot easier to get through. But then I wanted to do a lot of work yesterday and like play a lot more poker. So I did take a nap, and then I woke up and I felt a lot better, and I got a good number of hands in. The games were amazing. Friday night is my Monday morning, has always been my poker sort of, I don't know, mantra, quote, whatever, outlook. Basically, Friday night's the best time to play, or it's the first day of the week, sort of poker wise, and then today's the second day of the week, right? I think it's Saturday, although maybe Saturday morning is my Monday night. I don't know. From there, we'll just start with yes, powered through, and that's really what it comes down to. I think is like when something's particularly challenging and we're trying to establish a habit, if we can find a way to sort of dig down and just use our willpower to get through that one iteration, that one spot, and like, where does that willpower come from? I don't know, but sometimes it can come from a conviction, like a clarity in terms of like, what are we trying to achieve? What are our goals? And not just what are we trying to achieve, but I think more importantly, why are we trying to achieve it, right? Why do we want what we want? I think that, for me, makes it easier to then do the work, right? And so far, I've been seeing good results from the work. I'm very pleased, I've been streaming every day and been gaining followers, which is great, and I appreciate it. And getting closer to like being a streamer as a, not as a career in terms of making a living from, but like as a mode of supplemental income, right? And that'll be nice. It'll make it easier to say, okay, maybe I can grow this to the point where it is a living, or it's an element in one. I mean, I think I'm going to do YouTube as much as Twitch, and get back to writing some texts in, both for poker and fiction and all sorts of things. But moving towards, still playing poker, but not having poker be the primary necessarily source of income, as it is very volatile and stressful. And, I like creating things. So, I've been seeing results immediately in the short term by having this habit of just, get up every day, do it every day. And I've also been trying to eat a particular way and get a certain amount of exercise. Not a lot of exercise, but like just enough that being as unconditioned as I am at the moment, it's enough that it causes positive change, right? And then as I get closer to a better sort of physical state, just in terms of health and in terms of energy, I can increase the exercise, and it will take more exercise at that point. But just kind of building small habits and, immediately seeing results is nice. Sometimes you don't see results that quickly, and that can be frustrating. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of set like, okay, I want to try and do this many days of this thing. And, but one of the reasons I didn't tell anybody how many days is so that I don't, build an expectation that I can't meet or that I don't meet, or I have throughout my life often overpromised and underdelivered. Sometimes I've overdelivered, but I think I often set myself up to just do too much. And so just trying to keep it simple. And this is, it could be a decent bluffing hand. We've got a queen, we've got a 7, so we're blocking the queen high straight, we're blocking the jack high straight, right, which requires a 7. But we don't have any draw to a straight. We have a runner draw, but we can't make the queen high straight. We have a backdoor flush draw, which now we would have a flush draw, but it's very weak. So I would much prefer to bluff with a hand like, king 9 or like ace king 9 or like 9-8, something that actually has a real straight draw to go with it. Maybe the other thing about a hand like 10-9 or 8-9 is that that's then blocking some of the hands that they're going to want to call with, not just the straights, but the sets and the 2-pair combos. Not to mention the fact that this is 4-way limped pot, and you probably don't. Yeah, so their hand looks like they flopped a straight and bottom 2-pair. So pretty decent hand there. Can be tricky in a multi-way pot where you can just be drawing stone cold dead, where there's a bigger straight out there and someone can have that, and then someone else can have better 2-pair or a set that makes you drawing dead. This is kind of tempting because I've got the 3 Broadway cards, and I feel like this player is quite loose. The few factors: one, this hand isn't actually very good. It's also not suited to the king; it's suited to the jack. I'm out of position, and the big blind has fairly aggressive pre-flop stats, and because of that, I can look at my 50 cents and say, well, I'm not necessarily going to get a flop for 50 cents, right? They're going to raise a fair amount, and that's going to be annoying. And this isn't a hand that I should play anyway, but I should have a little bit tighter range than I otherwise would, even though, the loose player is someone that I want to play pots with. I think I don't have to go too far out of my way, especially when I'm the small blind, right? If I'm the button and they're limping the low jack, I can raise a little bit more than I'd raise against a, maybe a tighter limper. All right, so they make the nut flush, right, which is not the nuts. There are boats available, but they have the 4, and the 4 is a nice card to have because it makes it harder for their opponent to have a full house. So when you're thinking about betting like a flush on a paired board, if you also have trips, on the one hand, maybe you're blocking some hands you could get called by, like trips, but I think it's more important than you're blocking the boats. And if you have like an ace high flush, you're trying to get called by smaller flushes, right? Or if there's a paired board and then there's 3 unpaired cards, if you have like those 3 pair and then you have a nut flush, I think it's a lot easier to bet the flush because you're blocking tons of boats. And, you really want to do that. It makes it harder for you to be losing. And, one of the things that makes a thin value bet too thin is it's just going to run into too many hands that beat it. And, the other thing would be that there aren't enough weaker hands that might call. But when you're against these loose passive players, I think you can often get a bet in spots where you maybe shouldn't be able to or otherwise wouldn't be able to. But you really don't want them to have a whole bunch of hands that beat you. So having a 4 in that spot It was very nice for that player. Having a 2 would be a pretty good card too, oddly. Would it be better? It might even be better to have a 2. Especially since no one seemed that interested in, yeah, okay. Alright, we get a full pot bet on this very red turn. Straight flush is possible. Someone was asking me yesterday how often, like, the straight flush is going to be there. I don't know statistically. It's going to depend, of course, on ranges in terms of how often, you know, what percentage of the range is that straight flush combo, how many opponents are in there with what ranges. I think, like, in PLO, it's a thing that happens, right? I mean, it happens in Hold'em, but it happens very rarely in Hold'em. It's like, wow, I can't believe that happened in Hold'em. Whereas in Omaha, it's like, oh yeah, a straight flush, okay. Just like when you have the large boat and someone has the quads, it's like, oh, am I running into quads here? And there's certain lines of action, right? Certain ways the hand can proceed that will really narrow it down. We're like, yeah, this is a straight flush. But in general, I think I guess the big thing to think about is like which cards are making the straight flush and how likely is my opponent to be playing those cards. Blue jack. So I have double suited 10s, which is nice. I have a jack with it. The deuce is fairly poor. I think this I can play multi-way. There's going to be a lot of good flops for me. If I do flop a 10, I can have, you know, flush draws, backdoor flush draws. So now I'm double blocking the nuts, but all I have immediately is a gutter to the nuts. And, you know, in a pot this big, with a bunch of loose players, I don't think I'm really going to be trying to run over people. The other thing is if the board were like 7-8 jack and I was double blocking the nuts, well, I'd be double blocking the only straight. But here someone can have 9-5, someone can have 5-4, and there's, you know, a lot of players at this table I think are fairly likely to you know, just call it off with those weaker straights. That's one of the things that makes the table profitable, but it's one reason that, you know, a hand like 10-10 here is not going to be quite as effective as a bluff. 9-9 would be better because it would be blocking 2 of the straights. It would be blocking the nuts and second nuts. But, okay, so this player decided to go for the check raise. They're basically just saying, like, hey, let's get it in against your, you know, 2x pot stack. They did flop that underside, and the other player had the bigger one, and then I got there, of course, immediately on the turn. So if they gave a free turn, you know, that's an advertisement for don't give a free turn. Also, having a pair with the lower straight gives them the draw to the higher straight, right? When the 9 comes, 5-4 does not make a 9 high straight. It still only has an 8 high straight. But 5-6, which they also had, does. So that was fortunate for them, but also good for them that they had the 6. Interesting to see the hands that people were playing here. Let's take a look. So 6-5-5-4 double suited, okay, reasonable looking hand. Ace-9-5 tray, double suited, also reasonable looking hand. I'm not saying they necessarily should have played those hands that way pre-flop, but they're not like way out there kind of hands. They're, you know, they're at least decent hands. But yeah, if the player with the 9-5 had checked flop, which would have been very reasonable given that they had the second nuts, not the nuts. Although in that spot, the second nuts are blocking the nuts. You know, we would have turned the nuts with the Jack 10 and won the pot. Unless somehow I got bluffed on the river when the board paired, which is possible. They would have had a 6, which would have been an interesting bluffing, you know, blocker for bluffing, but yeah. All right, so again, I'll try to focus in more on the hands I'm not involved in. That's part of the idea behind one tabling, is to pay attention to all the hands I'm not involved in. I think I've talked enough about habits and stuff like that for the day, and we can instead just try to build the habit of a high level of focus. We have an open limit from, this kind of loose so far player, so they can have a lot of hands. I would expect anything kind of connected, or with a suit or with a couple high cards, might open limp there. When the big blind checks, I think we can remove a lot of the strong hands from their range, because they have been fairly aggressive so far. And when they fold this flop, they probably just have nothing. Betting there, 9, 7, 3 deuce rainbow. That's a very just like nothing kind of board. So I think, they could have any of the two pairs, really, because of how loose they are. And I'm going to fold this and mark it. I think this is going to be an open on the button. It might be a hand to play here. I'm really not sure. These rainbow hands, I know you're not supposed to play very many rainbow hands, but I am the cutoff. In the cutoff with a very loose player behind me and then an aggro player in the small blind, I might want to play slightly stronger hands than I otherwise would, because yes, the player behind me isn't going to give me too much trouble in terms of like 3-betting. If they call and then the other player 3-bets, I'm going to have a hard time calling that 3-bet without a hand that's going to play well multi-way. And it's going to be a fairly large 3-bet, because it'll be a raise and a call of a raise. So the more money is in when the 3-bet goes in, the larger the 3-bet can be, right? Because it's pot limit. There's more money in the pot. All right, so this is a limped pot. We folded a lot of the cards that interact with this board. Full pot bet, though, from the big blinds. They certainly can have 4-3. They can have all the 2-pair, all the sets. Probably not so much with the ace-ace. Probably no one here has ace-ace very often. A set, if the big blind had like a set like 6-6-4 or something like that, 6-6-4-7, I think that would be a very reasonable hand to go pot-pot. This would show the value of having like a 4-7 with your 6-6. You'd be, the 4 would have been blocking the straight, and you would have had a straight draw that now got there. Even without the 7, you'd have the second nut straight, which is nice. Which is also, the second nuts. And, pocket 6s, I'd say, were the effective second nuts on the turn. Like, they were technically the third nuts, the literal third nuts, because ace-ace would have been the second nuts. But since it was so unlikely anybody had that hand, the 6s kind of go further up in the effective nuttiness spectrum. So, to take a moment to evaluate this table, it looks quite good. We've got two very loose, very passive players. On my right, I've got a not super loose, also passive player. And then there's a player who looks like maybe they're trying to play reasonably. And the player who raised to 3 here, which, like, I feel like that could be a lot of hands, right? $3 is not a very substantial raise. It feels like a pot sweetener, like they're just like, oh, I've got something that's maybe kind of connected and kind of suited. Let me just raise and get in with only these kind of loose passive people and, get rid of the big blind. Probably have the small blind fold. That player feels like they're probably a little over aggro, but we haven't seen anything super out of line that I can recall. So it's possible that they've just been getting good hands. I mean, sometimes that happens, right? Anyone's stats can look like anything over a small number of hands. All right, so they turned the nuts. What happened on the turn? Was there money on the turn? I feel like there wasn't really money going in on the turn. I could be wrong. I am going to pop that up, though, and look at what was the turn action. Oh, no, there was a bet. They check-called the nuts on the turn. Interesting. Okay. All right. So, that's potentially noteworthy. The other person had 9985. which is kind of connected and, has a pair. So I sort of get where they're coming from. I'm not sure that's a hand that you should be playing in that spot. Had a suit. Let's see. 99853 3 diamonds. Yeah. So, yeah, we can see, they're not playing like super wild hands, but probably hands that are a little questionable, especially in the rake structure. And it wasn't a super premium hand, and they didn't raise pot. They made a smaller raise, although we've seen that even when they open raise, they often make it 3. Full pot size bet from the fairly tight, or fairly, not very loose, fairly passive player. 10-10. Okay, so, they flopped very good. The turn wasn't great for them because all of a sudden the card they're hoping to run into, which is a 3, and they hope that person makes a full house, would have made quads. Clearly no one had it. And again, we'll take a look at the action there. It looks like there was no money on any of the other streets. It makes sense that they wouldn't want to bet the turn. I wouldn't really want to bet the turn with 10-10 there either. I'd be hoping that somebody had like 8s or 9s and would call a river bet, or even like aces or kings or queens or jacks or whatever. This is a hand that isn't going to be in the matrix. I think, I don't know. It's probably close. If the 8 were like a 9 or a Broadway card for sure, I would go ahead and raise here. Maybe the 8's actually better than a 9. I'm not sure. Probably, right? So I think maybe this is a raise. The fact that my opponents are very inclined to play hands, and so I'm not that likely to just take the pot down for a raise, discourages me from having that wider opening range. So if I think a hand is close, I'll be more likely to just let it go. So it went limp raise, and then call, and then I believe check call on the flop. 7-8 can be in either player's range. The player who bet the flop is more likely to have it, I'd say, as usually you'd want to play 7-8 kind of aggressively. But if you had 7-8 with absolutely nothing else, I think there's something to be said for having some of those nut straights in your check call range. They both had 7-8, interesting, and the one player only wanted to check call. Now they did, on the turn, I think they can go ahead and check raise, or what was the flop action? The flop action was check call, and then the turn was, what's table deposit? What the heck? Oh, okay, that means I rebought. It's weird that has that in the hand history. So yeah, so check call on the turn, and then check river. So the one player had the 8-8-7, right? So if you have 8-8-7 there, you're less likely to be up against another 8-7, which then can be free rolling you, right? So I think putting in the raise on the turn would make a lot of sense. Let's mark this one to see what sort of hand similar to this we might play. I'm reasonably confident this is a fold. I'm not sure. I feel like this is a hand I would probably open in the cutoff, but might actually be a fold in the cutoff. It's kind of hilarious. My VPIP this session has been 4. I think I just haven't been dealt very many hands. I don't think I've been playing super conservative or anything. Sometimes that happens if you're playing live poker and you end up playing that tight or that few hands over a period of time. It helps to have someone to chat with at the table, or to really focus in on the hands that you weren't dealt in. I mean that you didn't voluntarily enter, right? All the hands you folded, which is like all the hands just about. So this turn card really changes the nuts. Nobody wanted to bet the flop, so a player with some like 8 whatever business, that would be those would be some good bluffing blockers. Again, the river changes the board a lot in terms of what constitutes the nuts. Now a boat, well, quads, are the nuts, a straight goes down in value a lot, but a flush also got there. So straight, it's like, if you were bluffing and you weren't blocking the straight, it seems like that would be a very good place to start to, you know, to represent, because you kind of want your opponent to have a straight there. Although you'd think, well, wouldn't they raise the turn with the straight? Right, so I was kind of hoping for something like this, even though it's not something to really be expected. But I've got ace, ace. Having the king isn't great because I want them, you know, I'd be happy for them to have kings. But aces, I'm just going to jam as much money in particularly out of position as possible. And if I get one caller, you know, there's going to be at least 50 in the middle. So I'm going to have a 1.5 to 1 SPR. I'm probably going to get it in on just about all boards. There's certainly a lot more nuance to playing aces that I'd like to discover and get, you know, involved in. This, now they can have a jack, right? But they definitely don't have to have a jack. I'm going to bet an amount where then I can just jam turn. This is a very dry board. They can have a deuce. Not a super likely card. As far as boards that have a pair, this is like the least scary one possible, right? And I could just keep trying to kind of like piece it off. Like there's just no draws. Like try and get like queens or whatever. I'm actually going to do that. Usually I would just jam here, but I feel like just trying to get a little bit in at a time actually makes sense against this player's range on that exact board texture. I would say that's maybe particularly leading towards an exploitative play, but a lot of it is just like the board texture, right? Let's take a peek at it quickly again before we play these next aces. Yeah, jack, deuce, deuce, 6 total rainbow. Like, it's so hard for, if they're not already beating me with like a deuce or like jack, jack, in which case, whatever, I get stacked unless I spike an ace. If that's not already happening, then I am really in great situation. It's going to be very hard for them to draw out on me. So kind of drawing out the hand and just betting a little. So this is different, right? This is different. If we look at the stack to pot ratio, it's 5.5 to 1. So it's going to be a lot harder to, if I get all the chips in, I'm not necessarily thrilled about it in a hand like this. Whereas last one, it was just like, if they have jacks or they have a deuce, c'est la vie. Having said that, I did flop the second nut straight against a very loose opponent. I'm not actually going to pot it, but I'm looking at where that is. Okay. There are a lot of uncomfortable turn cards like that one. So, you know, this is very unpleasant if they put a large bet in. I'm not blocking much in the way of, I'm not blocking any of the board stuff, right, in terms of boats. I'm not blocking any of the strong flushes except like ace-4 or whatever. I think this is the point at which I have to give up. If the board had run out something a little cleaner, I think I'm going to check call the turn, maybe even check raise all in on the turn, as I don't think my opponent needs to have the nuts there to be putting the bet in. And, you know, 6-9 is possible, but isn't going to be like super duper likely. And this hand, if I wasn't rainbow, I would want to continue. Well, not necessarily against a 3-bet from this relatively tight player, but yeah, we'll mark the other aces hand also for further discussion. Hit that review. And the other one, pre-flop, we'll look at what types of hands like the previous we might play. This, I don't think this is that good. It's one of those hands that looks like, oh, well, queen 9-8, those all kind of play together, 9-8-5, those play together, and I've got a suit. But I have a suit to the 8. As we've already discussed, this isn't the best open raising scenario. This is a nice open raising scenario if I have a strong hand, because I'm going to raise, get cold called, and then 3-bet with a fairly high frequency. So if I have a hand that I want to put a lot of money in, it's a great situation. but this is not that. So, my best hands are going to gain a lot of value in a situation like this, and my worst hands, I think, are going to suffer. And so I can just fold the worst hands and then gain all that value with my best hands. And the worst hands aren't really making a whole lot of money anyway, right? The worst hands just have a little bit of positive EV. So when the situation gets worse, we lose that EV if we keep playing them, or if we start folding them, then they just become 0 EV. And I'll mark this one for pre-flop. Yesterday I did a lot of work with the matrix, basically looking up every hand after the session that I wasn't sure about in terms of pre-flop play. So I find that very helpful. And I might have a link in the video description below. I am currently, as of the recording of this video, not an affiliate or anything for Upswing. So, I do have an affiliate thing for Poker Tracker 3, which is, the HUD and the, database program, which I highly recommend. I've used Poker Tracker since 2007, I believe. Might even be late 2006. So, I recommend them not because I'm trying to make money from an affiliate link, but because I've used their products for a long time. Unfortunately, I kind of snoozed on this hand, and it looks eventful. Wow. Okay, that's unfortunate. Let's take a look. That was the one where I had that oh no. Okay. Well, we won't look at it too much. I think there's value to be gained from looking at a hand that that has been played. Let's focus on the current hand though. So this player's been on the tighter side, so I'm not necessarily gonna 3-bet them too liberally. This might be a decent candidate. It's double suited, but it's really only blocking aces and ace-x combos, which are going to be a lot of the 4-betting combos. So I think it might be decent as a 3-bet. I flop top pair and a flush draw. Heads up, this flush draw has so much more value than it does in a big multi-way pot. I definitely don't think my opponent has to have a flush to be, they don't have to have a flush draw to be betting the flop there. The Queen of Diamonds is a nice card because it adds, it takes away queen high flushes from my opponent's range as well. And I don't think I can get value from that much, but I'm going to bet. I mean, they can have jack high, 10 high flushes. I think if they have ace high flushes, like, hey, good for you, I didn't mean to do this. That's a fairly offensive gesture, I think. Yeah, but that wasn't the intent. But so it's hard to really get value, and on the in position when you can just take a showdown. When I can take a showdown in that spot, I don't really want to be making small bets, but I think sometimes there's some value when you think you have the best hands, like almost always, right? On the river, even if you don't think you're going to get much value, betting and having your opponent fold, I think sometimes can have some sort of psychological value in terms of just like getting them maybe sometimes a little frustrated, right? If you keep doing that, they keep folding, eventually they might, pay you off or do something kind of out of line. I'm going to raise it. This person across from us might be new. This might be just a posting. All right, so we get 3-bet. This is a little annoying. If I was double suited, I think this is a good spot for a 4-bet bluff. Although against this player, I'm not sure if they're folding to any 4-bets. I will go ahead and fold and mark this hand. It's a little tricky to look up because there is a limper. So, okay, so they really weren't out of line with their 3-bet, and a 4-bet would have been pretty disastrous. So I'm glad that we didn't get too creative there. I will mark that though and kind of see what am I generally supposed to do there. It'll be hard to tell because that third player was just kind of playing weird, right? They either posted or limped, and then they called the 3-bet kind of cold, right? They hadn't put in the first raise, so they called a raise and a re-raise at once. So that scenario might not be totally covered, but we can get the gist of how we're supposed to respond against a 3-better, and then kind of alter that a little bit, play with that to figure out what to do in that spot. Although truthfully, I'm a little less interested in how to play that exact spot, since it's kind of uncommon because the other player was doing something a little odd, than I am in the more general spot, right? I think sometimes when, you know, when we're thinking, oh, how should I play this exact hand, the lessons that are more useful are, how should I play in a slightly more generalized version of this spot, and then if I change this factor, this factor, this factor, how does that alter things? All right, 7-7-4 against in a four-way limped pot. Nobody decided they wanted to raise, and because of that, I think this board is a little more scary than it would be in a raised pot, right? A lot of 7x hands are gonna be checking. A lot of things with 5, 6, 3 kind of things can be present. So far, nobody. Okay, the big blind bets out here. The big blind should have a decent concentration of 7s. When they checked, there were still 2 players left to act. When this player who called the bet checked, there was only 1 player left to act. Now, it was an aggressive player, and this person we've seen can be fairly passive, so I wouldn't say they can't have a 7. I think either players could have some diamonds in their range for sure, but probably not a high concentration of diamonds, because they should be leaning more towards trips in terms of like boat draws. And the person who bet out could have had, here I think 10-7 is going to be the, yep, there it is, 10-10-7. So I thought that was probably the most likely hand where they're betting. They bet the turn with a 7, which makes sense, but because their bet was half pot, I don't know. I mean, they could bet, maybe half pot's just the bet they use for their range. It felt to me though like it was a little more likely to be on the weaker side of a 7. We're gonna raise this limped pot unless we get to 3-bet a small blind raise. We get to make it $6 because there's $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 in the pot. We put that on top of our $1, so we raise 5 more on top of the 1, and we get 6. I'm gonna try to explain some little sort of simpler things along the way. So now we're going to get a big multi-way pot. So are my aces going to get cracked? No. I'm going to flop top set. That wasn't really where I was going with that. But how much do I want to bet here? I'm out of position. I am the one who's going to have the things. There are a lot of straight draws. I will bet this much. Against this one player behind me, I could go pot and get it in on the turn. This player's, maybe just going to get it in or almost get it in. I'm shoving any turn against the person with 6-19, and I did size my bet in such a way that if I get called by the $76 person, and we'll just put it in against the $6. That's a very bad card for me. They quite easily could have... Oh, the river was the bad card. Okay, that's fine. I was expecting to already be losing, but then I was quickly losing on the river. So when I was saying the thing about are my aces going to get cracked, the joke was going to be, like, the point isn't, you raise with aces, and the point isn't whether aces are going to hold up in this, like, 4-way raised pot, right? We don't expect the aces to hold up in a 4-way raised pot. We expect the aces to need to improve. And if we look at my exact combination, I had ace high spades. I also had the 7-5, so I can make some straights. And I had the aces. And so I had a lot of things going there. And I ended up flopping top set. When you flop a set with, that hits your aces, you have top set. And since there was no straight on board yet, it was the nuts at that time. On the turn, like, they're going to put the $6 in. If we check if they have the nuts, we might as well put it in and make sure that they put the money in when they're behind, which they were. Let's see, what did they have? Okay, so they had spades, which were weaker than mine. They basically just had top pair, top kicker, and that runner straight draw, which came in. I guess they had 2 runner straight draws. It could have come 8 and a 7, but... yeah, so that's a pretty long shot. hand, but, you know, it's fine. All right, again, this isn't maybe the best spot to play a lot of hands, and technically I should generally be thinking, am I going to play this in the cutoff? And actually, I think I am going to play it in the cutoff, as I am suited to the ace, ace king 9-6, suited to the ace. You know, I'm concerned that I'm going to get 3-bet a lot here, and maybe because of that, I should rethink how I'm playing this hand, but I can't, I don't know. I don't want to, like, overcorrect for that. 3-bet at 43, though, is very high. And they're giving it a lot of thought. So sometimes their 3-bets are very small, though. Like, they min 3-bet me that one time. And if they're going to min 3-bet me, then I'm not so unhappy. I'm not so unhappy getting 3-bet because I would call them in 3-bet with basically anything I'm raising. I flopped the nut flush draw against two loose passive players. I'm a little tempted almost to put a bet in for value. I might be able to get some folds, but we saw them call very, very loose last hand. Now I turn top pair, top kicker to go with my nut flush draw and the sevens on board. I think my hand is pretty decent here. If I get like a pot bet towards me, I'm gonna have to fold. Have we seen much betting from this player? I'm not sure. I am going to call this because, while drawing to the nut flush isn't fantastic in a paired board, I think that my ace king is going to be good here a non-zero amount of the time. And now I do make the flush. 7-6 is a combo that's fairly reasonable. Can I bet my flush here? I think I can't because this other person called behind me, and we've seen them slow play a lot of very big hands. And because of that, I'm going to check. I do have the 6 blocker, so 7-6 is a little less likely. I don't think my opponent who bet the turn is likely to have me beat, and I did have the best hand, and everybody had ace-king. Just everybody had ace-king, and I had the flush draw with it. That's kind of funny. I don't think I get called there by either of those hands. I would be hoping to get called by a 7 or a weaker flush. And if I was heads up, I would have bet that hand against this particular opponent. Absolutely. But because the third player was in, I felt like that would be a little too thin. And because of that, I decided to check it back. Let's mark that hand for a little bit of further discussion. Review. Okay. There's been a limp from the button and then a bet from the button. What sorts of hands does this represent? I think, 2 pair sets. Not a lot of draws. Yeah, set, bottom set. Very, very sensible hand for them to have in a situation like that. I will fold this. And we're getting close to the time of session completion. I can play one more orbit, I suppose. I was thinking of doing some 3-tabling later today, but I haven't gotten that layout set up. I might set up the layout. I might finish this stream, finish this session, do the session review, finish the stream, and then maybe do a second, bonus stream today if I get the 3-table layout set up. So if I do, and you want to know about that, make sure notifications are turned on. I believe they default to being turned on. And if you're watching right now, if you've been receiving notifications, then, and if anybody wants me to let them know, I will text certain people who I know would be more likely to tune in. But it'll be interesting to kind of see some 3-table. What was that river action there? All right, I'm just going to pop this up and we're going to play through that hand and ignore the one that's currently going on since we haven't really seen anything about it and we know this other one was interesting. We had the raise from the low jack, call, checks with a set, bets, calls with a set, checks, and then do they bet? Yeah, they bet half pot and they get called. Okay, that makes some sense. With the straight draw out there, I think check calling the set seems fine. I mean, it's a boat draw. What did the other player have? The other player had the wheel, right? Yeah, they had ace-5, so they had the straight, the lower straight, but also seems like a fairly reasonable approach from them. Though I think they could have bet the turn, right? The board paired on the river. Okay. So we will hit sit out next blind and play this last orbit. Looks like maybe a new player across from us, right? I believe, but it doesn't say new player, so maybe it's not. Maybe it's the same player. We will proceed as if we don't know anything about them. I mean, why else would they be posting in the cutoff? I think it's a new player. And it probably said for all of last hand that it was going to be a new player. I feel like it should say that until the person's first hand. It should say N for new player. And then it should go away after that hand. So you're like, oh, this is their first hand. If it says N. All right. A little stretching. A little water break. And shortly I will resume babbling. Okay, queens with an ace. The 3 isn't a great card, but it does connect with the ace. This might be a hand that I raise if it folds to me. I think I can also... I'm going to overlimp. If it was double suited, I would raise. I flop a gutter with a backdoor nut flush draw. If somebody bets like $1, I'll be pretty happy to put in $1. If someone bets something like pot, I'll feel pretty comfortable folding. 3/4 pot, sure, I can hit the nuts on the turn, 4 outs of that. The second queen actually makes that a little more powerful, right? Because if I have the nuts, then, well, I'd rather have a second ace. I mean, obviously, but the second queen makes it harder for me to chop, but it also makes it harder for someone to have a hand like Queen 10, Queen 9. That would have made the lower straight there. Okay, so this I'm going to open raise. If there's a raise on my right, I don't know whether this is something I'm supposed to be 3-betting, cold calling, or folding. I think I'm going to cold call. My guess is this is a cold call, and we will check it out. The player behind me also makes me want more cold calls in general in that spot. It encourages me to cold call more. And I flop a flush draw. Am I going to have the most sixes? I think the big blind's going to have the most sixes, and they're going to do a lot of checking there. All right, so now I have a huge draw plus a pair. The pair's probably not good. It could be good, but it's probably not good. I have a huge draw on a paired board. You know, nothing gives me the nuts. I'm just going to go ahead and fold. Free card would have been delightful. And if I bet the flop, then I'd be in a lot better situation on the turn. I will mark that other hand just for pre-flop, that last hand. And we fold this, and we see how this hand plays out. And I will begin to get the replayer fired up so we can just swap it in really quickly. All right, they're kind of saying they have the wheel. There was a raise pre-flop, and the pre-flop raiser is the one who should have all the ace-ace. Big blind, actually they're the small blind, right? So they shouldn't have too much deuce-5. This hand is going to be a fold. Time for the session review. So we see a open raise from the cutoff. So I'm going to look up button versus cutoff, right? So I'm the button, I'm facing a cutoff raise. Let me just close that table. And I have Jack 10 high. Single suited. So I'm going to look up single suited. I always make sure that's what it is. Jack 10, 9, 8. Whether I'm suited to the Jack or anything else, it says cold call here. So this was correct. This is something I would have had a lot less of an idea of what I should do here if I hadn't done the work I did yesterday. So already I feel like it's bearing fruit where, you know, just planting those seeds of like seeing some hands, what you're supposed to do with them, it can really make it a lot easier to then see another hand and be like, oh, I'm pretty sure this is what I do with this hand. Now I'm looking up other rundowns because I just kind of want to take this spot and learn a little bit more about it. And like a 9 high rundown, I just fold, right? Single suited. A 10 high rundown, my guess is I'm gonna fold, right? And I fold. And I think the reason is that Jack 10 can make, these Broadway straights. It's just a little bit higher, and that little bit higher really helps. So, I like how I played this hand before the flop. On the flop, I can think about taking a stab here, I guess. There are going to be a lot of pretty good turn cards, and neither of my opponents have really said that they have anything. Now, I think from the out of position player, that's not a really strong declaration, right? They could be going for a check raise with like a 6 with queen, queen. And, when the turn comes and they bet, I think I fold, right? Yeah, I fold because, yeah, they can have queen, queen. They can have queen 6. They can have 6, whatever. And I'm never going to be able to put money in confidently on the river. And when we get to that, I think the next hand, I'll talk a little bit more about this concept. But when we're calling a bet with a draw, unless we're getting direct odds to a hand that we're confident is going to be good if we get there, which here, I'm not confident about any of that. I am getting direct odds to like complete my hand. It's just that I don't know which one of those are going to be good. And if my opponent bets out on the river, I'm probably going to have to fold most of the hands that I make. But that idea of confidently putting money in on future streets is going to apply to this hand, where we get a limp. This was a limper, okay, and then I go ahead and isolate. So the chart that it says to use for this is to look at the cutoff open raising chart. Now this would be ace king single suited, ace king 9-6 with the good suit, right? Because I have suited to the ace. It says it wants me to raise and then fold if I get 3-bet. So that seems reasonable to me. The only thing that is a bit of a struggle there is that the big blind has a 43 rate, 43% 3-bet percentage. So that's quite high, right? So having hands that I'm going to raise fold or having too many of them seems like a bigger weakness against something like this. Whereas I want more hands that I'm going to raise call or just raise jam, right? Raise, 2-bet, 4-bet basically, and then get it in because they're going to have a bunch of hands they shouldn't. And is a hand like this going to then be a call? I don't know, maybe. Maybe if they 3-bet, I would want to call with this hand, but it would feel pretty dirty. So anyway, that's pre-flop. Let's get on to the flop. The flop is decent for me. I flop the nut flush draw. I think I can just put a bet out here and be like, hey, do you want any of this? But instead I check it back. The board is paired, so my outs aren't very strong. I'm not blocking any of the potential boats at that point in time, right? So the idea of being able to confidently put chips in on later streets, that applies here, and that I'm not really going to be able to do it. So I don't really want to build a big pot. Having said that, betting and getting them to fold some hands, could be good. These players probably aren't going to fold a lot of hands. They were very loose, and so yeah, I think they're going to do a lot of calling, but maybe bet the flop. I don't know. I liked how the turn played out insofar as I turn top pair, top kicker. Yes, this player can have a 7. They can have a boat already. But because of what I've seen from them already, I think there's a reasonable chance that if the river comes a club, my hand's going to be good. And if they check to me, I feel like I will be able to play that with some confidence. I will be able to bet there. I will be blocking, ace 7. That's nice. And as it turned out, I would be blocking 7-6 as well. So I call this bet, and now this player comes along. This changes the situation some, right? This player we've seen be very passive with some very strong hands. We've seen them check call the nuts on the turn. So I think they can have a hand like 3-3. They can have a hand like 7-3, ace 7, 7 blah, 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 that then makes 7-6. So when I get 2 checks to me, having, I was saying I don't want to call the turn if I don't think I can play a river with confidence. And that's true, but this other player could have folded, and if the first player, the small blind, the player to, I guess, my visual right, if you're looking at the screen, but the left if you're sitting at the table, that player changes the dynamic. So that's the reason that I didn't bet this for value. I am blocking the ace and I'm blocking the 6. So I'm less likely to lose to hands like ace, ace, ace 7, 7-6, 6-6. right? So blocking all those boats, I think maybe this should be a value bet, even against these opponents. This was more of a read specific, I don't feel like against these exact opponents I want to put the value bet in, but I think maybe I should have. I didn't really consider the blocking the ace whatever, right? Blocking ace 7, and you know, my opponents probably don't have ace anyway, but having 2 blockers to the boats, this would have been a really nice spot to be able to get that river value bet in with the flush. I would have bet on the smaller side, maybe something like $11, $12, where I'm not usually going to bet that small on the button, on the river, right, when I can just take a showdown, but I think it would have been worthwhile here. I was maybe over concerned about some of my opponent's tendencies, maybe having too many of those strong hands, but they can also have flushes because, you know, and call those, or 7x and call those because they are loose and passive. So I think I worried a little too much about monsters under the bed, and I think this would have been a nice place for a relatively thin value bet, specifically because I'm blocking the ace and I'm blocking the 6. All right, and if we look at, you know, on the turn, this player had ace 3, but the 3 doesn't play, right? They have aces and 7s with a king. The other player has aces and 7s with a king. And if an 8 came, player 2 would have won. If a jack came, player 2 would have won. If a 10 came, player 4 would have won, or a 3. But unless those were clubs. So, all right, moving on. Next hand. Ace, queen, jack, 4. There's a limp, and I raise, and then we get 3-bet. So again, we're going to look at the same basic chart, right? It's going to be ace queen single suited. Again, I want to look at the cutoff raise first in, because there is this limper who was a limper, right? An actual limper. Ace queen jack 4 is a hand that with the nut suit, which I have, I am going to raise and call. And with the not best suit, you know, the bad suit, which generally means suited to the queen or suited to the jack, but because I have the 3rd card of my suit, I think maybe this would be, maybe because of that it's a fold. But I think with the nut suit, I think I probably could have / should have called this 3-bet. And, you know, just for peace of mind, I was actually up against aces, which is interesting, but like not super interesting, like whatever. But I guess it's interesting because it's like, yeah, this player 3-bets a lot, but they still get dealt aces, right? Aces are still going to be a reasonable portion of their 3-bet range. It's just going to be a much smaller portion of their 3-bet range than they would be for another player. But like, they're going to have all the ace combos, right? They get dealt them, except not all of them because I had an ace. So anyway, yeah, I think maybe call pre-flop and then get myself into some trouble. But moving on. All right, so yeah, I folded this 8-7-6 double suited. We can first start with the cutoff RFI, but I think I was mostly thinking, what do I do with this if I'm the button? Do I open it as the button? 8-7-6, so 6-3 is a fold, 6-4 is a raise, and call. Basically, if I have a hand like this and I raise the cutoff, I'm going to call a 3-bet, right? But it won't be a hand like this. It'll be a hand that's slightly better, that will have a 4, or, you know, even 8-7, 5-4 would be a play where all the cards are from one 5-card straight. The 3's a pretty bad card. So again, we were pretty confident that that's going to be a fold in the cutoff, but let's take a look at the button. I think it's going to be a raise in the button, and I think I'm going to call a 3-bet. And I am wrong. Cool. Okay, so learn something. The exact same types of hands like this are played. This is double suited, 8-7, 6-4, 8-7, 5-4. So having that 3 is just very bad, right? So I think in my mind somewhere, I knew the 3 was bad, and thus I shouldn't play it in the cutoff, but it's actually bad enough that I should fold it in the button as well. So, good to know. Moving on. 10, 9, 9, 8, and we face a cutoff raise and a 3-bet. All right, so this isn't really a question in terms of what do I do with this hand. Maybe what do I do with this hand double suited, but mostly I wanted to think, if I'm the small blind against the cutoff, or if I'm the small blind against the button, kind of how does this hand fare? Or what am I supposed to do with it? So I'm the small blind. I'm going to look at versus cutoff, and not even squeeze, just regular, and 9-9, 10-8. So single suited 9-9, 10-8 actually is just going to be a fold against a cutoff raise anyway. That's single suited. So I'm rainbow. So this hand I think is quite a bit weaker than I had felt. Right? It feels like a better hand, I guess, even with a suit. So, but let's look small blind versus button. What are we supposed to do there with 9-9? I feel like we're gonna have to play this, right? Against no, 9-9 single suited against a button raise, we actually fold, even with the 10 and the 8. The only ways we're playing a pair of 9s in this spot is if we also have a pair of 8s, a pair of 7s. So like 9-9-8-8, 9-9-7-7. Obviously 9-9-10-10 is a category of 10s, so that's different. We're going to play that, I assume. And then also if we have a suited ace, queen, ace, king, basically an ace and a card 8 or higher, then we're going to play that. So this hand is fairly poor and I guess very easy to overvalue. If I were to go back though and look at like double suited, right? I think double suited, it's going to be a different story. Let's think where we're the small blind. Let's look again versus cutoff, small blind versus cutoff. But let's look at 9s double suited, right? So double suited with the 10-8, yeah, that's a hand that we can 3-bet and then call a 4-bet. So that's the power of being double suited. It just makes the hand that much stronger, because if we're going to be really piling in money pre-flop, which if we're the small blind and someone's raised, we're mostly raising or folding, right? There are a few calls in the range, but mostly we're raising or folding. If that's the case, then we really want that extra equity where those weaker flush draws are just worth a lot more when we're probably going to get heads up with a low SPR, because we're more likely to get it all in. And as such, we're more likely to realize the equity of those weaker flush draws, and we're less likely, we're not going to face big reverse implied odds from them, because we're not going to make the flush and then not know what to do with it, and either have to pay off a bet or fold it and thus not realize the equity. Hopefully that makes sense. You probably need to understand all the equity words and reverse implied odds words to have that make total sense. But the point being, weaker suits are going to be better heads up, and they're going to be better with a low SPR, right? Meaning less money left to bet. Having a bunch of money left to bet or a bunch of opponents makes those weak flushes much more costly. All right, so I'd say I have learned something here, that 10-9-9-8, even single suited, just isn't that good. It's just not that good. All right, ace, 6-4, especially out of position facing a raise. We'll narrow that down a little bit, right? Okay, so I've got the aces with a suit, and I decide to 3-bet, and I flopped a second nuts. And here, I can check raise, not all the way all in. Actually, let's go back before the flop, and we see, like before even anyone raises, we see that this player, before they raise, they have 122. So we usually start with 100 blinds, and then if we're winning, we can get more than that. I have them covered, right? So I have 135, they have 122. That's going to be the effective stack for this hand, meaning we're basically playing with a maximum of 122 wagered apiece. 122 and 32 cents. So they raise. So when I 3-bet, which I think I'm just supposed to do and just have to deal with it and learn to play these hands out of position, I'm going to get some uncomfortable situations, because the stack to pot ratio basically is 5-1, right? So that means the pot is 22 and the stack is 111. 5 times 22 is 110, but then 5 times 50 cents is another 250. So 112.50 would be 5 times 22.50. So it's basically 5-1. So there's 5 times as much money left to bet as there is in the pot. So the money in the pot is less important than the money left to bet. So we're still going to struggle over the pot, but we've got all this money left to bet. And so we run the risk of getting in situations where these reverse implied odds situations, which means in order to realize the equity of our hand, in other words, to win when we have the best hand, we're going to need to wager a lot of money. We need to risk a lot. We're going to need to risk probably 5 times the size of the pot to find out if it's the best hand. Or potentially we could need to risk that much. So I check, and they bet 16. And I think at this point I looked like, how much can I check raise to? And it would have been about 70, which would be pretty close to all in. And then I'd probably be just getting it in on the turn most of the time, unless it was the catastrophic card that it was. So what I'm thinking here is I'm going to check call, and this opponent, they can have some 6-9, but they're going to have a lot of draws. There's going to be a lot of very bad turn cards. But if it's not a very bad turn card, I might check raise all in and try and, I'll have a straight and they'll have some kind of a draw. It's a rough spot, though. The 6 is blocking some of the nut straights, so that's nice. It's harder for them to have 6-9. Also, 6-9 isn't like a super common combination for someone who open raises and then calls a 3-bet, from the hijack. But with this player, very possible. And I'm blocking, one of the spades. So it's a little less likely they have spade draw. It's a little less likely that the draw gets there if they have it. My aces, you'll notice, are just like totally irrelevant in this hand. Sure, if the turn is like an ace of spades or an ace of clubs, then I have some chance at making aces full, or quad aces even, and that will probably win. But basically I'm playing 4-6 now, so I could have had like king 9 4-6, right? Actually, no, that would be better. That would be the nuts. I could have had like king queen 4-6 or something. The aces are just irrelevant. So in terms of playing this hand, I should go from thinking, okay, I have aces, to thinking I have the second nut straight. How do I want to play the second nut straight out of position? And think, what do my aces do? They block a lot of the ace whatever combos that my opponent has. And since the aces don't interact with the board, they're actually kind of bad to have, I think, in that they take away hands that I would like my opponent to have. I'd like my opponents to have an ace. I'd like them to have 2 aces. And so I do go ahead and call this with the plan of maybe check raising the turn, but kind of trying to figure out, kind of hoping that they just sort of give up. This 8 of spades is a terrible card, probably the worst card in the deck for me, as it pairs the board and brings the flush. So if they had a set, if they had 2 pair besides bottom 2 pair, or if they had a flush draw, they pulled ahead of me. Also, they could still have 6-9. If they have 6-9, it's less likely that they'll bet now. And if they have 6-9, now I have 4 outs to beat it, right? I can have an 8, or I can have an ace come, and that will give me a boat. But as it turns out, I have a dead man's hands kicker to my straight, aces and 8s. They bet, I think, a pretty reasonable amount where then they're going to be able to get it in on the river. I don't think they have a lot of straights at this point. So they're either going to have some like really weird bluff where they're just like, you checked, I'm going to bet. Or they have me beat. And there's so many hands that have me beat at this point that I think this is fairly straightforward fold. I am going to, how do I mark that? Yeah, I am going to mark this hand for, let's see what they had. Tomorrow, let's see, what did this person have? What were they doing this with, right? Did they flop the nuts? Would check raising some brick turns have been a good idea? And that won't necessarily tell me what to do in the future, but it'll give me just a little bit more of a feel of what people are doing, what people like this, what kind of wild, somewhat out of control, but not super maniacal opponents are up to in spots like this. Okay, moving on. I thought I had another aces hand. I guess I didn't mark the other aces hand. Maybe it was just kind of straightforward. All right, this hand, super clear fold in this spot, but let's check the cutoff range. Well, I mean, we can look at 5s. Do I play any single suited 5s in this spot? Yeah, if I have a suited ace to go with it, or if I have a suited king with an ace, right? So ace king 5-5 with the suited king, it looks like I can play. And 5s and 4s, 5s and 3s, 5s and 2s. So those are the only single suited 5s I would play. So very specifically have to have something else very good, like the best other thing I could have with this hand, and be still single suited. So let's take a look at the cutoff. Am I open raising some single suited 5s with the cutoff? My guess is it's going to be similar. in terms of which single suited fives. Yeah, very similar. Pretty much any of the suited aces, except now I can have a suited queen. I can have ace queen with a suited queen, and ace three suited. I think on the other one I folded like ace something else. With the deuce, I actually want to fold. So this isn't even close to a play in this spot. I'm going to see if this is a button raise, though. Instinctively, it feels like a button raise to me, but from what I've been looking at today, it feels like it's not. It's not. So, like 5576, 5574. It's interesting that this is worse than 5574. Why would that be? 875 feels better than 754. I don't know. And even 5563 single suited we're supposed to play, but this one, oh no, it's not 8-5, it's 8-7. My bad. But that we don't play either. So this is a fold even from the button. So it's a hand that I think in the past I've overvalued, and I can make that adjustment. And my PFR can remain like 4. Okay, we're going oh yeah, we're going the right direction. It had been higher earlier because I hadn't folded as many hands. King 9, Jack 8. From this spot, I think rainbow, very clear fold. Let's go back to that button range though and look up King Jack. First single suited. Was this the one? No, it was King Jack 10-8 that I was thinking I was undervaluing. But that again was single suited. So here, if I go rainbow, King Jack rainbow, King Jack 9-8 is a hand that I can raise on the button. Rainbow, right? I don't need a suit. So this would be a button raise. I guess let's go back to the cutoff and see in this actual hand, verify that in fact I should fold this hand. And in fact, King Jack 9-8 rainbow. Oh, I didn't turn rainbow on. I gotta make it rainbow. No. King 10-9. King Jack 10-9 is a hand that will raise rainbow from the button. That is the only King Jack high that we raise from the button. So, and that's a hand that we, oh no, this is cutoff, sorry, from the cutoff. So we need those 4 cards within a 5-card straight. So this is just clearly a fold. And now we're in a very similar territory, but different. We're looking at the hijack, and we're single suited, right? So that's better. And King Jack 10-8. So we'll look at the hijack range, and King Jack 10-8, single suited. We are going to raise, and we are going to call a 3-bet, whether we're suited to the king, the jack, or the 10, right? So any of those, this King Jack 10-8 is actually a pretty good hand. So this is a hand that I will mentally say, okay, I was underestimating this hand. King Jack 9-8, though, is worse. And it's just basically where the gaps are, right? Having the 2 gap, like a gap at the top and then another gap just below it, is just significantly worse than here having these 3 Broadway cards, right? Any straight that we use 2 Broadway cards to go with 3 board cards and there's no counterfeiting or anything, that's always going to be the nuts. That's going to be Broadway or some other nut straight, right? We can have a king high straight, we can have a jack high straight, and those will be the nuts. So this hand is substantially better, as those hands, not only are they better, but they're also hands we can play with more confidence and get money in more effectively on later streets. So that was all the hands for today. I'm going to wrap up the stream there. Let's just double check in on, yeah, no further chat. Thanks for watching. As always, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's super helpful, much appreciated. And I'll be back tomorrow for more of the same kind of thing, but, you know, new situations, different situations every day. Have a good Saturday, Sunday, whatever, weekend.